Roman people was the idea that there are many gods. And what had been passed from generation to generation is the idea that the offspring of the god, and indeed the gods themselves, would visit humanity from time to time. So when Pilate heard that, Pilate became fearful that he was dealing with somebody who might indeed be half divine. And Pilate did not want to incur the wrath of the gods. And so Pilate became fearful and took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, "Where are you from?" But Jesus never gave an answer. Pilate wanted to know who he was dealing with, and more than who he was dealing with, what he was dealing with. But Jesus never opened his mouth. Why don't you talk to me? Pilate demanded. Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or crucify you? You see, Pilate, to hide his fear, began to speak with bravado. Don't you know who I am in all of this? Don't you know that you're talking to the one who makes the final decision in what's going to happen to you? I'm the one in power in this situation. He says, I've got power to release you or to crucify you. Pilate's standing here. And that's what I want to deal with, Pilate, because Pilate represents a man with a fallen nature, who's seeing things not as they really are, but as he desires them to be. Thank God for Jesus. I'm thankful that because of the presence of Jesus, I can face some ugly stuff that's true about me. And I've come to understand in my life, even now, I'm challenged because I don't like everything I see about me, and I'm thankful for God's grace for me. But when it comes to you, I don't want God's grace, I want God's justice. And God has to remind me every now and then that what I've done for you, my desire is to do it for everybody else. And if you've experienced my grace, you ought to be able to extend grace to other folk when they're not doing what you think they ought to do, when they're not acting the way you think they ought to act. Extend them grace I've given to you. Why? Because even though you don't publicly say it, you know, if not for my grace, where you would be. Problem in the church is that we have Pilate's syndrome. We know some stuff ain't right, but it depends on who doing the ain't right as to our attitude about what's not. And that stuff gets in and it begins to affect the church to the point that the church is not everything God has ordained the church to be. There is a social construct in the culture that does not belong in God's kingdom. It takes the power of God's Spirit working in us to give us the courage to call things wrong that are wrong and be willing to go outside the gate where Jesus was crucified for us and stand on that truth to suffer with him.